Can you count how many fingers are on your left hand? Can you count how many cubes of sugar you're going to put in your next cup of coffee? Can you count the number of letters in the English alphabet? I'm sure that you answered yes to all three of these questions. And that's because the ability to count is something that's possessed by all humans of a certain age. Even little kids can do it. It seems so easy and commonplace. But the problem is when you're asked to give an account of this simple act. A Dutch philosopher and theologian named Cornelius van Til had a popular quip. He said that atheists can count, but they cannot account for counting. That sounds good, I know, but it's actually a pretty profound statement. And here I'm going to explain how the ability to count actually proves the existence of God. So real quick, I'm going to provide the logical chain from the ability to count to the existence of God. So counting requires the ability to individuate, and the ability to individuate requires that we possess individuative concepts, and our possession of individuative concepts requires a system of concepts, a systematic relation between the objects of the world, and a correspondence between our system of concepts and the system of objects in the world. And this correspondence cannot obtain without the existence of God. So therefore, the ability to count requires the existence of God. Now I know there are certain notions in that chain that require explanation, and I'll get to that right away. First of all, what does it mean to individuate? Well, there are two senses of the term individuation. There is a metaphysical sense and an epistemic or cognitive sense. We are concerned with the latter sense. And as a cognitive activity, to individuate an object is to single out that object as a distinct object of perception or thought or linguistic reference. So when I am able to single out this particular apple on my table and think about it or talk about it, I am individuating that object. So that is what individuation means. And from this we can see that individuation is central to our ability to count, because counting requires us to individuate different objects. So when I point to different apples, I know that they are individuals and they are distinct, and that is why I'm able to count them. The concept of counting requires numerical distinctions and individuation. However, the notion of an individuative or sortal concept is fundamental to the notion of individuation in this epistemic or cognitive sense. As E.J. Lowe puts it, and I quote, "As far as individuation in the cognitive sense is concerned, it is certainly plausible to say that one can only single out an individual object of thought or reference as an object of some kind, not barely as an object. This is because singling out an object in this sense seems to require the cognizer to think of that object as falling under some sortal concept, merely to point in a certain direction and assert, for example, that object is red, always invites the question, which object? To which an appropriate reply might be something like that book or that flower, in which a sortal term is invoked. Sortal terms are general terms that convey sortal, or as we may also call them, individuative concepts. These can be contrasted with what may be called adjectival or characterizing concepts, which are conveyed by such general terms as red and square. End quote. So now the question arises as to whether our individuative concepts have any purchase on the extramental world of objects. If our acts of individuation, and by extension our acts of counting, are to be thought of as real and not illusory, then there must be a conformity of the world of objects to our system of concepts, individuative or otherwise. What this implies is that the extramental world of objects must exhibit the same systematic relationships that obtain in our system of concepts. So basically, there must be a systematic relation between the various objects of our thought. For example, the objects in the world out there must be related in a way such that my concept of book or bookness, which is an individuative concept, finds purchase in those objects. If not, whenever I classify an object as a book, I am merely engaging in self-deception because no objects actually correspond to that concept. Now we can ask the further question of what can facilitate the systematic relationship between the objects of the external world. For the objects of the world to possess a systematic relationship to one another, there must be a system of concepts in virtue of which these objects are what they are. However, this presupposes the existence of a rational mind whose thoughts and concepts provide the blueprint for the instantiation of the objects of the world. That is, without God, there cannot be a systematic relationship between the objects of the world. And from this, we can conclude that without God, there cannot be individuation of the cognitive sort. And from that, we can conclude that without God, you cannot even count the number of fingers on your left hand.